No hurry. We
All
have.
rise.
All right. All right. That moves us on to the consent agenda. Is there anyone that would like to pull an item? If not, I'll take a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right. This is voice vote. We can. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 5-0. All right, this is going to get somewhat intricate because this is quasi-judicial and we have a new procedure which we haven't used before. Anyway, we have moved to 4A1, an ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, requested by Dr. Benjamin D. Emerson of Vero Beach, Florida, incorporated to amend comprehensive plan future land use map by changing the future land use designation from residential low 6 units per acre to residential high 15 to 18 units per acre for property located at 1610 Highway A1A, including all of Lot 1 and Block 18, Block 2 of the Ocean Corporation subdivision, totaling 0.74 of an acre, more or less, and providing for an effective date requested by the Planning Development Director. This is the final public hearing, is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, it's the first public hearing, too, I believe, is it not?
First and final.
All right. The first thing we have to do is disclosure by council members of ex parte communication, if any, including at site visits. I have several things to disclose. First of all, I live there. I'm very familiar with the site. Secondly, I've received a number of telephone calls. I don't know the content of them because I didn't take them. There have been a number of emails that have come in, and I have tried not to read them, but I probably have some idea of their meaning. I attended the hearing of the Planning and Zoning, and apparently one of the members of the Planning and Zoning Board saw that I had an opinion. I was trying to stay poker face, so as the case may be, I have all that to reveal.
I visited the site.
I was contacted by someone, I can't remember her name, but I never spoke to her or got a message. And I also glanced at some of the emails that came in to City Hall that I know everyone was also copied with.
Mr. Kramer,
I've driven by the site and noticed the sign was out there, and it's we've been getting the emails, and we do read our emails, and I've read them.
So, with that said, I guess we've disclosed what needs to be disclosed. Is there?
Not quite.
Mayor, go ahead, Mr.
I also live in the neighborhood and walk my dog on that area. I have not spoken directly with anyone. I have reviewed the planning and zoning hearing notes. Having followed the first reading of these two ordinances, I just wanted to remind the council that per our city attorney briefing on quasi-judicial matters, that officials must go into the hearing with an open mind and base their decisions on competent, substantial evidence and law presented at the quasi-judicial hearing. So just a reminder.
All right. The next thing we have to do is we have to swear in applicants.
Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I believe Mr. Moore represents the applicant, and if he has any questions of any council member because of the ex parte communications were disclosed, he does have the right to ask questions about that regarding any bias or prejudice.
I would like to know if any of the council members who had thank you. I would like to know if any of the council members had conversations with any individuals, whether or not they were a member with whom they spoke.
One of the planning and zoning members came up to me and said you didn't seem pleased, and I didn't comment, but that was communication to answer your question, Mr. Moore.
Okay. Any members of the public, Mr. Mayor?
No members of the public, other than all the emails that have come in and so on, which I've tried not to read, but.
I wish I could not read mine.
I've never spoken to anybody.
Okay.
I do live near the area also. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I think we're going to handle both ordinances at one time since they're tied together in one hearing. So if you wouldn't mind reading.
I will read the second one then. B5B. No, wait a second. I may have this wrong. I'm sorry. A4A2. That's correct, isn't it,
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, requested by Dr. Benjamin D. Emerson, amending the official zoning map by changing the zoning district designation of R-1A single-family resident district to RM13 multiple family resident districts for property located at 1610 Highway A1A Lots 1 and 18, Block 2, the Ocean Corp subdivision, containing 0.74 of an acre, more or less providing for an effective date requested by the Planning and Development Director. Final public hearing. So now we just swear in. Mrs. Vach, you have the...
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Do we not need to swear in anybody who would intend to make public
They're going to have to.
Exactly.
Yes, we
We'll
do.
do it.
Thank you.
Any further people want to make public comment that we didn't swear in?
We can swear them in when they come up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Mayor makes announcements as to exhibits. All diagrams, photographs, and other exhibits referring to the testimony or which you would like the council to consider must be marked or identified and kept by the city clerk. I'll let staff do that. What exhibits, or Mr. Moore?
Staff has entered into the staff written report, and the agenda will be part of the record on this.
So that would include these zoning maps and so on?
They're all included in the staff report. That's correct.
Does that satisfy the requirement, Mr. City Attorney?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, city staff presentation, then it brings it to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, I'm Tim McGarry, Director of Planning and Development. The applicant, Dr. Emerson, is requesting a change in the future land use and zoning map designations of his .74 acre property located at the east side of State Road Highway A1A between Sandpiper Lane and Jasmine Lane. We show that on the future land use map up there, shows the location of it. The request is for a change of the future land use designation from residential low to residential high, and a change in the zoning from R1A single family to RM13 high density multifamily. And I'll show you the zoning map. If I turn it on, I can. There we go. Well, didn't quite move ahead. All right. I think we'll just pass on that. The map. Okay. The subject property is occupied by a one-story family residence. Directly abutting the property to the east are two single-family residences designated residential low on the future land use map and R1A zoning. Across Sandpiper Lane to the north are a multifamily development on property designated residential high on the future land use map and residential RM13 on the zoning map. South subject property across Jasmine Lane are multifamily development designated RH, residential high on the future land use map, and RM10 on the zoning map. Across A1A are single-family homes designated residential on the future land use map and R1AA, which have a minimum of 15,000 square foot lots. The subject property borders A1A but is accessed only from Sandpiper and Jasmine Lanes, not A1A. A1A is classified as an urban minor arterial in 2013. Minor arterial in 2013, it carried average almost 15,000 vehicles per day. The level of service standard is D plus 30% for this highway. It's operating at a level of service C for northbound traffic and a level of service B for southbound traffic. The first step in the analysis, what we do is try to compare just basically what the differences in designation before we go into an analysis. The existing residential low future land use designations apply to areas of city suitable for detached single family, from going up to 6 units per acre. This designation allows uses also associated with such residential development, either as of right or as a conditional use. The proposed residential high designation is 10 for high-density residential uses based on access to public facilities, adjacency to arterial collector streets. This designation allows a full range of residential uses, including uses associated with residential as both as of right or conditional use. It allows residential development up to 15 units per acre 18 for congregate multiple family, exclusively for senior housing with kitchens. The existing zoning is R1, is intended for single-family detached dwellings. The minimum lot size 10,000 feet. This equates to a density of approximately 3 to 4 units an acre. In addition to single-family uses, other uses such as educational institutions, golf courses, country clubs, places of worship, public works and recreation, utilities, and cultural activities may be allowed subject to conditional use approval in R1A. The proposed zoning allows single-family, duplex, multiple-family residential uses, congregate living facilities, and nursing homes as a right. With conditional use approval, it also allows similar uses as R1A. In addition, daycare services and congregate multiple housing for the elderly with kitchen facilities are also allowed with conditional use approval. Under the current zoning of R1A, the subject property could be divided into 2 separate single-family lots and meet the code. Under the RM13 zoning, a total of 9 dwelling units could be developed for a typical multifamily development. The staff reviewed the requested future land use map and zoning map amendments based on the standards for considering such requests in Section 6522 of the Code. I will briefly touch on some aspects of the review which the staff believes are most material in making your decision. A full analysis is provided in the staff report as part of this agenda package. The first thing is the justification for the request. Pursuant to Section 6522 of the Code, the staff finds that the requested amendments are warranted and justified to improve the potential for the property to be redeveloped for multifamily development, which is more compatible with the high-volume traffic on A1A and provide a transition and buffer between the single-family residential uses and A1A. In fact, with the exception of the subject property, all the en bloc parcels within the vicinity of this neighborhood have commercial or residential high land use designations with their corresponding zoning designations. The staff has also reviewed the requested land use change with the comprehensive plan and found it to be consistent with the goals and policies and objectives of the comp plan in Chapter 163. More specifically, it supports and furthers land use element policy 1.6 that is applied to areas of the city which are suitable for multifamily uses with high densities based on access to public utilities, adjacent to arterial and collector streets, and which provide a transition between more intensive uses. In this case, the heavy traffic volume in A1A is considered that. The staff then reviewed and found that requested rezoning consistent with the comp plan and land development regulations. The most significant review findings relevant to the request were the proposed zoning is consistent with the land use policy 1.15 of the comp plan as it is listed as an appropriate zoning designation under this future land use designation. The proposed zoning is consistent with the purpose of the M13 to provide multifamily housing in appropriate locations. In this case, such expansion is consistent with the progression in development of multifamily housing along A1A and other non-commercial uses in this A1A corridor. The proposed zoning is compatible with the zoning map destinations in the immediate vicinity. With the exception of the subject property, all the end block parcels that have frontage along A1A have multifamily or commercial designations. To the north and south of the subject property, the properties are zoned RM13 and RM10 respectively and have multifamily housing developments. Therefore, multifamily housing should not have any noticeable impact on existing land uses. Concerns regarding impacts on adjacent uses will be appropriately addressed through the site planning process, which would require a quasi-judicial hearing and notification before the Planning and Zoning Board and notification to residents in the area. While the properties to the east are zoned single family, they have no real direct access to A1A. This pattern of uses and zoning is consistent with other areas with similar circumstances in the immediate vicinity of the property with higher intensity uses being located along the high volume traffic corridor. Staff finds that conditions have changed since the subject property was originally platted, zoned, and developed due to changes in land uses in the vicinity, increases in the amount of traffic on A1A. These factors warrant a change in the zoning designation. Staff finds that the existing capacity utilities and public facilities would be sufficient to accommodate any future development under the proposed rezoning. The staff did a more in-depth review of the potential impact on the road system to compare the differences in the levels of traffic that may be generated between the existing zoning and requested zoning. A 9-unit multifamily development was identified as the most intensive trip-generating uses under the RM13 designation, resulting in 52 daily vehicle trips with 4 a.m. peak hour trips and 5 p.m. peak hour trips. This was provided by the consultant. In determining the trip generation for the subject property on the current zoning, the Planning and Public Works staff assumed that the subject property could be divided into 2 lots to give it the most intensive use. That potential development would be result in about 19 weekday trips with 1.5 a.m. peak and 2.02. It's amazing how we get down to these decimal peak hour trips. The difference between the two, the RM13 and the existing zoning, would be a little more than 30-plus trips per day on an average. On May 7, 2015, the Planning and Zoning Board held a quasi-judicial hearing on the request. Based on the staff findings and the staff's applicants and public testimony, the Planning and Zoning Board recommend approval of both requests. At this time, based on the analysis and findings presented in my testimony and the staff report and the favorable action of the Planning and Zoning Board, the staff is recommending approval of the 2 ordinances before you tonight. Unless you have specific questions.
I have specific questions.
Okay. Then you may ask those.
What was the vote of the Planning and Zoning Board?
It was a unanimous vote.
However, if you go to the minutes 5, 6, and 7 of their minutes, and I was at the meeting, but there was considerable concern about the high use on 0.74 acres, and there were 2 gentlemen that were present. I can't pronounce his name, Mr. Croteau on the board, and Mr. Cahoy on the board, who asked why RM8 zoning wasn't more appropriate. And there's actually three pages of minutes.
That's correct, and we discussed it at the meeting. And the decision was you look at the 2 uses, the designations adjacent to it, so it had to be appropriately high. The other was brought up by the applicant, the way the property shaped, the size and all that. Some flexibility would be given in the higher density zoning for that. And as I said, site planning will take care of any kind of other.
My only point to you is that it wasn't unanimous. There was a great deal of discussion, and part of the discussion was that there was RM8 in the adjacent area and so on. So there was a lot of discussion. The other thing, as far as traffic flow this last year, there has been considerable problems during the season getting through that light. In fact, many times I've had to go down Seagull and then go down Riomar and then across the Bethel Creek Bridge because of the traffic on A1A at that light. Now, part of the problem is, that intersection has needed to be redone. But it is not true that that street or that highway can take a whole lot more traffic during season, in my opinion.
Well, that's your opinion. It has capacity on there, and clearly that intersection's a problem. If you recall, we didn't want to use the impact fees to make those changes that would have made a difference on that road. But we're talking about, as I said, additional 30 trips. I don't believe that's very significant when you look at the overall case of things. But you're right. I mean, I live on that, and I can tell you, I have to make a left turn in the morning. It's pretty bad.
Well, okay. Further comment by staff, please.
I have a question. Does the RM8 and the RM10 zoning designations allow adult congregate living?
They may as a conditional use. No, we hear no. We hear yes. Yeah, I don't have my zone, so they do. But I believe it's under a conditional use. I'd have to, if you don't mind, I'll have to.
No, I'm take your time, but I need to.
Yeah, it allows a conditional use. We really didn't get into conditional uses because they're a site-by-site type thing.
Are there further questions of staff?
I have
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You have the floor.
And then with RM8, what's the number of units allowed in RM10?
Okay, RM8 is 8 units an acre. On that property, you would have 5 units would be allowed under that. Which, as I said, I point out in my cover letter, we did go through a little discussion of that, of what could be on that property. It's different.
And for RM13, adult congregate living, is that a conditional use?
Yes, for that type, yes.
All right, thank you.
All right.
You still taking questions?
Yeah, still taking questions from council. Absolutely.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, when was the property, the current owner, when did he buy it?
I think you can ask that of the owner when the applicant will be making a presentation I don't
Wouldn't
know.
it be in the records?
It's in the records, but that wasn't something I.
About 20
1986.
Okay. And does he live there, or is he?
My understanding, it's still his residence.
I rent it now. I lived there for 20 years
Okay.
with my family.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, the staff can be cross-examined.
Can I ask one more question before
Yes,
we
you
move on?
indeed may.
Cross-examine.
Sorry, Mr. McGarry. So the designation of RM10 and RM8, the one that is west of Pirate Cove, on the west side of A1A, and then RM10, about how long ago were those changed from residential? Just timeline. Ballpark is okay too.
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
Any further questions from council?
Okay.
Mr. Moore, you may cross-examine staff if you would like.
I have no questions for Mr. McGarry at this time.
Okay, applicant presentation, Mr. Moore.
Yeah. Just 1 second. We're trying to get the PowerPoint.
There was an error. Yeah, close
I'm going to call Mr. Moore for tech support. He's got a second career going.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just make sure that works. Okay, beautiful. Great. Thank you. Good evening. For the record, my name is John Moore. I'm an attorney here in Vero Beach. It's my pleasure this evening to be here representing our client, Dr. Ben Emerson. Dr. Emerson is the owner of the property, the subject property, which is located at 1610 Highway A1A. For the record, I'd like to enter the following additional items. I'd like Madam Clerk to enter my PowerPoint presentation as part of the record. All the materials that we've previously submitted to Planning and Zoning, I would like to add to the record, along with to make sure the Planning and Zoning minutes are part of the record. In addition, one of the items that we presented at P&Z that I'd also like to distribute now to each of the council members is a copy of a document that was prepared in the late 1980s by city staff entitled the Professional Office and Institutional Studies South A1A. So give each of you a copy of that, which is very important to our presentation.
Mr. Moore, you want this part of the record too?
Absolutely, thank you. It should be through P&Z, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate that as well. So to begin the presentation, the property was acquired by Dr. Emerson in 1986, nearly 30 years ago. As you heard Dr. Emerson mention, until recently it's been his principal residence. It consists of 74 acres. As you know, it's currently zoned R1A, single-family residential. It's bordered on the north with an RM13 and on the south with an RM10 usage. Ms. Graves, to your comment, the RM10 property to the south is quite old. I would estimate by looking at it, it has been there since probably the late 70s or early 80s. The RM13 property to the north is the Villa Solana property. And my recollection is that's probably been done in the last 10 years, 12 years, something like that in terms of time frame. Across the street from, immediately adjacent to the property is Highway A1A. Across the street from the property is that portion of Club Drive which is closed off, if you know that. And in that neighborhood are single-family residences along with other multifamily developments. On the screen now, I have a Google Maps photo of the neighborhood. You can see that the subject property is located with the magic red dot. You can see here these locator items weren't placed by me, but rather occur as a result of Google Maps. You'll see, for example, some of the other uses in the neighborhood, which include SunTrust Bank, the Transocean Financial Center, the 7-Eleven, Johnny D's Bistro, the hotels along South Beach, along with various other uses. And that's going to be important to our presentation because the general theme of Dr. Emerson's application is that this is taking place in light of his 30-year ownership and a 30-year pattern of development that was both organized, sanctioned, and implemented by the city of Vero Beach, leaving Dr. Emerson the lone property holder not to have completed a process that was begun long ago. Next slide talks about the neighborhood, and I know we have some representatives of a group calling themselves the Ocean Corp Neighborhood Association. The Ocean Corporation subdivision was incorporated and platted in a manner very close to what's illustrated here. It is bounded on the west by A1A, on the north by Causeway Boulevard, on the east by Ocean Drive, and on the south by Seagull Lane. I think we're all familiar with those parameters. The neighborhood to the north you would consider Old Riamar. The neighborhood to the south on Seagull Drive on the east side of A1A is Castaway Cove behind a wall. And then you have the single-family and mixed-use multifamily neighborhood to the west side of A1A bounding this. The important point to note here is that there are 88 acres in that area, 88 total acres. Within that, there are 11 acres of single-family zoning. So if you go and demise where single-family, the R1A zoning is allowed, it amounts to 11 acres. And this property is no doubt adjacent to the far edge of part of that node. The interesting thing is that when you lay the 11 acres and the 88, you get a sense of perspective of what the neighborhood really is and has become by actions taken long over time. Effectively, there are 11 of the 88 acres in the neighborhood, or 12.5% of the total. Put another way, 87.5% of the existing land uses in the neighborhood, as it is defined, are not single-family. They're commercial, they're multifamily, they're tourist, they're POI, but they're not single-family zoning. And so in the end, it's difficult to call this a single-family neighborhood. There is a single-family pocket within a larger mixed-use neighborhood. And I think that's an important consideration to bear in mind, because we need to take a perspective that is relevant to the pattern of development that has taken place in the city over time. A pattern, by the way, I think that the staff has well recognized in their analysis. Next up, let's talk about the POI corridor as a defined entity. I mentioned before that one of the central themes in Dr. Emerson analyzing his property is the fact that the development along A1A has not been accidental. Dr. Emerson applied for POI zoning in 1989. Staff recommended approval at that time. The City Council delayed action basically to say, let us take a studied view of how we want to see development along a corridor on A1A take place. This resulted in the document that you have received a copy of, the document entitled Professional Office and Institutional Study, South A1A Corridor. It goes through a detailed analysis and lays out a map of proposed potential uses by the city. Interestingly, if you turn to the last two pages, you can see that Dr. Emerson's property was specifically mentioned in that study at that time, almost 30 years ago, as being designated for POI use. POI in our zoning arrangement is actually a higher use than the multifamily use that has been requested today. Or put another way, for roughly the past 25 years, right, Dr. Emerson has owned the property with the understanding that POI was the city's own suggested use. Now, with respect to the study, you'll see Mr. McGarry and I have discussed the study. Mr. McGarry has pointed out that the study was never adopted. And that's true because it would be awkward for council to adopt a study. How does council act? By implementing through ordinances, through zoning changes, through land use map changes. And that's exactly what's happened over 30 years. On the left, this is an exhibit from the proposed POI study back in 1989 where the city staff defined the POI corridor. You'll see it takes place on the left and right of A1A. It begins at Tulip Lane, north of Causeway Boulevard, and stops at the 7-Eleven property, now down on Seagull Drive. That's what was conceived of in 1989. Here's what's happened today. I've blotted out in blue everything that's not included in the POI study area so that we can focus on the relationship between what was proposed in 1989 and the cumulative effect of ordinances and decisions made by staff and by this council. You'll see there is virtual consistency and uniformity in what has been done since then in accordance with the plan that was put forth in 1989. The important premise here is this. This request isn't random. This request isn't taking place out of the blue. This request is taking place in connection with an ongoing, consistent 30-year effort of development of an area along the A1A corridor, and that's important. One of the factors that staff has touched on is the difference between rezoning this property along the A1A corridor, where there are 14,000 trips a day, and rezoning property interior to this. It's a very, very different question. And I think what the argument that we're building towards here is that Dr. Emerson finds himself in a rather unique position. Staff, for example, mentioned that Dr. Emerson is the only end cap on the east side of A1A that has not received multifamily, POI, or commercial use. He is the last piece in a puzzle that was begun 30 years ago. Let's continue on. The requests to be evaluated tonight. The first is the future land use amendment. That requires a change from residential low to residential high to accommodate any multifamily zoning. In other words, it's to create a capacity. The second is to rezone, and as you know, the request has been made from R1A to RM13. We'll talk about P&Z's analysis of the density of the request of RM13 in a bit. When you boil down the requirements in the RM13 zoning, there are two permitted uses other than multifamily housing. One is an adult congregate living. The other is a nursing home. In RM13, adult congregate living may not be possible because there seems to be a 2-acre minimum for an adult congregate living facility. This parcel wouldn't qualify. That leaves the potential of a nursing home, which from a business standpoint, really it probably isn't viable in terms of a very small nursing home. It's tough to conceive there'd be enough scale there to make that work. Let's just go through the staff report very quickly. Mr. McGarry went over the highlights. I just want to touch on them again. On an overall basis, the staff, after reviewing the history, after reviewing Dr. Emerson's submittals, came to say that the requested amendments are warranted and justified. They point out the end of block, the end cap condition that exists in the properties on the east side of A1A. They mentioned that the future land use plan, the map change, is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the rezoning requested is consistent with the plan and the land development regulations. One element of Mr. McGarry's presentation I wanted to focus on is this concept of multifamily at the end cap serving as a buffer. At every other end cap on A1A, the multifamily or higher intensive uses have been developed as a transition from the high traffic area of A1A to the single family area behind it. That's not coincidental. That is an intentional and congruous zoning purpose. By putting a higher intensity than single family, but lower intensity than commercial use in place, you're creating a buffer between a high traffic area along the road and the single family. Excuse me, my mouth is dry. The single family area adjacent to it. We also need to bear in mind, that'd be great, thank you. We also need to bear in mind when evaluating things like traffic that the current traffic load on A1A is generated, is basically estimated to be at 14,000 trips. Put simply, when one, thank you very much. Put simply, when one evaluates why it is that one would affirmatively want multifamily zoning in this position, it is to provide that transition area. Okay, next slide. The staff report also focuses on the fact that the rezoning is consistent with the comp plan and the LDRs. It's important to note that the staff's observation on the RM13 density was that it was consistent. We have RM13 to the north. We have RM10 to the south. A densely developed property to the south. I think there's 16 units on that property. I can't figure out how that happened, but it is a well-developed piece of property. With regard to zoning in the immediate vicinity, the proposed change is consistent with the pattern, and in fact, the language that the staff adopted in its report was that there is no noticeable impact on existing land uses in the vicinity of the subject property. In terms of change conditions, the report reflects what we have maintained with respect to the POI corridor study, that effectively the neighborhood has changed from a single-family use over time, and that the requested change made by the applicant, Dr. Emerson, is justified here. Maintenance and level of service. There's mention of traffic. The mayor mentioned traffic in context. The traffic engineers, the professionals who have studied this situation, have basically determined there's a level of traffic that's associated with the permitted single-family development now. And so the only real incremental traffic comes from the increase above single-family. If one examines that, what you find is that the increase to the proposed 9 units, and that's assuming that 9 units can in fact be built on the property, which is an assumption that has yet to be established. But if you were able to put 9 units, that would add 2 morning and 3 evening trips, okay, to a 14,000 car road. Difficult to see how that is impactful. That's why the staff basically concluded, along with the traffic engineers, that there's no adverse impact on the level of service with respect to any potential use on this property. The staff also concluded that the amendments consisted with the public interest and is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the land use regulations, and ultimately recommended approval. Let's talk about planning and zoning. Planning and zoning approved this by a 5-0 vote. I'm going to talk about the public comment for a second. We'll have other public comment here tonight. A review of the minutes showed basically this, that there were 3 people that spoke at P&Z. Each of them said they weren't opposed to multifamily zoning. They were concerned about the level of density. So density of use was an important consideration at the planning and zoning meeting. There was consistent application or reference made to questions about what would be intended to be done with the property. The answer is there is no plan for the property at the present time. The correct response is the one that Mr. McGarry gave earlier when he said that when someone comes forward with a proposed use, they will have to go through the site plan and the site plan approval process. And the way our zoning system is set up here in the city, that is the point at which public comment about the actual proposed use is in fact appropriate and should be evaluated by both planning and zoning and by this board. It's interesting, when one neighbor was commenting and asked about adverse impacts, the comment that was made was, well, in the end, I think what would happen is if you put multifamily at the end of my street, that there would be people driving by me, walking or riding their bikes by me on their way to South Beach. I think that's a very practical analysis of the kinds of impacts that would happen if you put multifamily at the end of the street. Bearing in mind, by the way, that in many of the neighborhoods, many of the neighbors have multifamily already at the end of their street, depending on where they are, or even a higher use. Let's talk about the P&Z consideration. The possibility of lower density, as the mayor pointed out, was discussed. Here's where I differ from the mayor's characterization of what happened. At the point it was discussed, Ms. Lyons, the assistant city attorney, pointed out that staff had found that RM13 was the consistent and appropriate use for the site. P&Z was offered the opportunity to pass this motion forward to you with a recommendation for lower density. They declined to do so. And in fact, what they did was to vote 5-0 to pass along the RM13 density recommendation after considering and affirmatively rejecting the possibility of proposing a lower density. And so, Mr. Mayor, if I could beg to differ with your characterization, in this case, unanimous was unanimous.
It was unanimous, but with considerable contention, and I don't agree with you. I'm sorry, sir.
Fair enough. But the vote was 5-0 and no recommendation.
The vote was 5-0, but there was very strong arguments that it should be lesser.
And was there a decreased density recommendation, or was there not in the vote by P&Z?
The vote was the vote, but the dialogue was the dialogue. You're playing lawyer on me.
That's my job.
I understand that. But you're not categorizing it completely accurately. The vote was a vote. It was 5-0.
No, the minutes speak for themselves. The minutes also reflect, the same minutes that you're looking at, reflect that P&Z was given a chance to make a recommendation. They evaluated it. 5 of them evaluated it, made no recommendation. It's you, sir, that's characterizing what happened.
No, I'd be glad to read it to you, sir, if you'd like.
No, that's fine. We'll consider on. Let's proceed. The nature of a quasi-judicial hearing, I think that's important to understand, and it's important particularly for the public to understand, because the backdrop against which this takes place is a differing kind of environment than in many other actions before the City Council. The City Council holds 3 roles effectively, right? There is a legislative role, there's an executive role, and there is, in this case, a judicial role. Sometimes the council acts as legislators in passing new ordinances. For example, if they wanted to deal with beach rentals or parking or any of the other issues that have been tonight, they act as legislators. And in that role, their decisions are limited only by the Constitution of the United States and the state of Florida. Okay? Or perhaps other state statutes from a higher authority which limit their authority. Sometimes the council acts as executives. They hire and fire employees. They enter into contracts. They put out requests for proposals, as was done earlier tonight on the utility issue, which I couldn't understand. Next up, though, is where we are tonight, and that is when the City Council is acting in quasi-judicial capacity. Effectively, they're acting as judges. Their job, as has been explained by the city attorney, is not a legislative act. It is not setting policy, but rather implementing policy. And that's important to understand. Dr. Emerson's request takes place against a series of rules that have been in place for ownership of property within the city for many years. Those rules are set by this council from time to time. Dr. Emerson brings forward facts, lays the facts against the rules, and it's the job of this body tonight to, if you will, evaluate the facts that are presented, right, and make a decision when evaluating those against the rules. In one sense, tonight's proceeding is more like a courtroom than it is like a legislative activity. To that end, within the procedure, and you should understand, I'm happy to welcome public comment, the applicant has the right to examine witnesses and ask questions of you. And so, should I ask questions of you, please don't be surprised. Understand that all I'm trying to do is to draw out the substantial, competent, evidential matter for full consideration by the council. With respect to the council, I'll note that there was a bit of a hiccup at the first reading of this ordinance. In particular, I don't quite understand it. If I understand the procedure from Mr. Comment's analysis, the first reading is merely to set the date for this hearing. That hearing, and correct me, Mr. Comment, if I'm wrong, issues as a matter of right to the applicant. The fact of the matter is the county doesn't even vote on those. They simply are presented, they're read, and they're scheduled for hearing. During that process, having watched it on TV, there was a substantial amount of confusion among the council members about whether or not materials were appropriate or significant, and yet there somehow managed to be a no vote cast on the simple matter of issuing a public hearing.
Mr. Moore, we're going to deal with that later on, and I believe that dealing will render this a moot issue.
Thank you. Can I complete this, though?
Well, I don't want to see this as a tangent. I mean, it has relevancy?
It's directly relevant this way, in the sense that, I give full faith and credit to the council keeping an open mind and making their decision based on the information that's presented here. That's what the council is called to do in a quasi-judicial capacity. The more cynical might say that no votes or failing to move things to a vote indicated a predisposition towards a result that's remarkably unfair to my client. So with that in mind, I'll trust the best judgment of the council to move the issue forward in accordance with the highest standards and with the guidance given by the city attorney. With that in mind, I would point out finally, in summary, two things. The competent evidential matter that's here tonight basically calls for approval. The staff recommends approval as an RM13. That includes expert traffic analysis. P&Z recommended approval with a 5-0 vote. The multifamily use is consistent with the overall character of the neighborhood. 87.5% of the uses in the neighborhood are higher than single-family residential. Dr. Emerson is the only end cap left. The proposed use is consistent with the city's own POI study and 30 years of development decisions that have come forth from this council over time. Dr. Emerson, in fact, has had for years the knowledge that the city, in fact, has told him he should consider, or they would consider, POI zoning for the property, which is even higher than his request. The size of the property may limit options. I appreciate public concern about what might go there. You should understand that debate is not closed tonight. If you have concerns about what may be built, those are certainly appropriate and meant to be brought forward at the site plan process. That summarizes, I think, the evidence in favor. There's just one more interesting quirk, and that is if you were to visit the city's website, you'd find an interesting condition at the moment. The land use, the current version of the FLUM map that is on the city's website already shows this property as residential high. The current zoning notice on the zoning map shows it as POI. Now, obviously, that wasn't done with council approval, but it stands for a pretty simple proposition that somebody who was looking at the map said, gee, this one single-family place that's an end cap along A1A sure looks out of place. I think it makes a lot more sense to color it light blue and to color it dark brown. That's what you'd find on the city's website tonight. So that concludes my presentation. I welcome any questions.
Oh, well, would you you have the ability to call a witness if you would like, Mr. Moore?
At this time, I see no need to do so. Our record is complete and amplified at this point in time. I reserve the right to call any witness in rebuttal to any information presented.
That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Absolutely good. Are there questions of counsel, Mr. Moore? All right. Seeing no questions, we move on to public testimony. So I'd like to see how many people would like to come forward, so I know, and then you'll all get to speak. So there are two in the back row. The gentleman on the aisle, come forward, please. Identify yourself and where you live and so
on. My name is Ron Rosenthal. I live on Jasmine Lane, 910 and 912 Jasmine Lane.
Mr. Rosenthal, have you been sworn in?
Yes.
Yes, he was.
Yes, but I'll get sworn in again. I had a couple of comments to make on some of the statements that were made here tonight. One of the things that I brought up, this is my third time around trying to get some comments in, but one of the things that I brought up and was brought up by the Planning and Zoning Commission was that it's the zoning from R1A to RM13 is unprecedented. In other words, that never, according to Mr. McGarry's statement, that's never been done before in one complete jump like that. It's in the minutes of the Planning and Zoning meeting, and one of the things that that was mentioned, and it's in the staff report here, is that the staff did not evaluate any other various zoning options in its report to Planning and Zoning. In other words, there was absolutely no evaluation whatsoever for any lower density zoning. They only considered the RM13. Nothing else was considered, and it's right here in the report from them, which I thought was very unusual, that the fact that other things weren't considered, even though it is restricted by the amount of land, okay, why wasn't an RM8 zoning considered, and why wasn't it reported on by the staff? So I found that very unusual. The discussion has been that this is 0.74, and I know this is a small point, that this is 0.74 acres. The tax records that going back as far as I could see, it's 0.69 acres. I don't know whether that's going to make any difference or not, but it's certainly, to make a little more accuracy here. There was mentioned the increase above single family, and I think one of the things that the biggest thing that we're concerned with is the fact that given this zoning that allows 15 to 18 units, even though there is not enough property there, all something has to be done is one more piece of property be bought, then it's a full acre, then that zoning becomes 15 to 18 on that acre, according to this zoning, according to the way that I read it. One other thing I'd like to mention is the traffic analysis. The traffic analysis, everybody knows that this is a heavily trafficked area right in there. It mentioned in this report from Kimley Horn that a traffic impact analysis is required to document the external traffic impacts of this proposed zoning. And when you go on and you read through this, we get to where it calls the area of influence. A project's area of influence includes all two-lane thoroughfare network roadways impacted by 8 or more p.m. peak hour trips, and all 4-lane or more thoroughfare network roadways impacted by 15 or more p.m. peak hour trips. Based on these standards, the area influence for this project does not include any roadway segments. The determination of study area intersections was also based on Indian River County Land Development Regulation criteria. Since the area of influence does not include any roadway segments, no intersection analysis were required. I find it hard to believe that the analysis of either the busiest or the second busiest intersection on the barrier island was not required. If you look at the potential, and that's what that word has been used by several people, the potential of traffic in that area, okay, there's really a potential of adding from what's zoned right now within a 3/4 mile area surrounding that particular piece of property, there's the potential to add conservatively 114 cars. And I'll be glad to explain this because we've got number one, 7/10 of a mile away where the old school used to be, St. Edward's School used to be, there's 10 lots that are being developed in there, taking a very low average of 2 cars per house, which we know is usually more than that. That's going to add 20 cars. They're going to come straight down Club Drive. They're going to use that intersection. Okay? the commercial property at the corner of 17th and Club with a commercial lot behind it, which sits right there at 17th and Club. It's a small building now, right behind that, I guess it's PNC Bank, okay? It's not being occupied right now, so that building is empty. I don't know how many cars that you want to consider might be involved in that business, plus the empty commercial lot behind it that will be developed or has the potential of being developed. Okay, there's several new homes on Greenway that have not sold, that have just been built. There's a multifamily lot on the corner of Jasmine and Coral. There's a multifamily lot behind Maison Martinique Restaurant. There's an R1A lot on Sandpiper itself that there's nothing on. Riamar Cove, directly across A1A from Sandpiper. That particular piece, they've closed and locked the gate that goes to 17th. Okay, you've got 7 lots in there, 2 houses right now, potential for 5 more lots. That's going to add another 14 cars that are going to be coming directly out onto A1A and entering from A1A that's going to impact right on top of that property. Okay, then we've got the property next to the 7-Eleven, which used to be Charlie's Crab and several things after that, okay, with, I believe, there's been a proposed 3-story building. I'm not sure if the plan has been offered to anybody or whatever, but that is another lot that for potential building and to add more cars. So in looking at the entire area, if that's what we're going to look at, okay, and looking at the entire area, I don't think you can make the scope of this down to just whatever traffic is going to be generated by the rezoning of this area, okay? This is kind of death by paper cuts here. It's a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here and a little bit there, and before you know it, instead of waiting through 3 lights to get across that intersection, you're going to be waiting for 5 lights. So I think that due diligence has not been done on, in looking at this from a traffic standpoint. And that's, besides that, we've got the public park and public beach. There's over 300 parking spaces down there for the public at the end of 17th, okay, that I don't think were considered in the traffic analysis. And I think that's a very important thing to consider. And I didn't get up before and oppose any rezoning on this property. Certainly the landowner's got the right to have multifamily on there, but I just don't think that the highest degree of multifamily is the correct zoning for this particular piece of property.
Would you stay there a minute, because if there's cross-examination first by the council, if anyone would like to ask the question, if Mr. Moore, if you would like to cross-examine, you certainly may.
Thank you. Good evening. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
Thank you for being here.
No problem.
But Mr. Moore, get in front of the microphone. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be impolite.
Yes.
There is a portable microphone, okay, Mr. Moore, in the drawer there if you want to turn that on.
I feel like Phil Donahue. Does that work?
I don't think you have enough hair to Phil Donahue.
That's a good point. Here we go. Let's try that.
There you go.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Good evening.
All right.
Mr. Rosenthal, where do you live?
I live at 910 and 912 Jasmine Lane.
Do you live in both or one?
I use both houses. I don't rent either one of them out.
Okay, that's terrific.
Thank you.
Married? Single?
Single.
Okay. Any children live with you there?
No.
Okay, good. At the end of Jasmine Lane where you live, what's the current land use there?
You're talking about the east end?
Yeah, the east end, or the west end along A1A.
It's the, I don't
Jasmine
know
Villas condos, does that sound right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, you've had a very sincere discussion about your concern about the density.
Yes.
If you'll grant my premise that RM13 would be 9 units and a lower density might be 5 units, describe to me the difference as you see it between 5 units being on that property and 9 units on that property.
Well, number one, RM13 is not limited to 9 units. You're limiting The property is limiting RM13. So
Correct.
if the property owner or who he may ever sell the property to buys one more lot, there will be an acre involved there. Then your situation is 15 to 18 units, according to what I read in the code. And I'm not an attorney. Okay.
Perhaps you don't want to be.
Not at this point.
I'd ask Mr. My understanding would be different. That in fact the land use map would suggest 15 to 18 units. The zoning would never be more than 13 an acre. And let me ask this, or you ask this of the council. Let me just to clarify
It says
this.
15 an acre.
That's on the land use map. The
Right.
zoning would
Okay.
be 13 maximum. Where, if your concern is about buying a lot, wouldn't the lot that have to be bought currently be a single family zoned lot?
That's correct.
Wouldn't that then have to be rezoned from single family to multifamily?
Absolutely.
And so the concern that you're worried about, wouldn't that be ameliorated to a degree because that issue would have to come back to council?
Well, don't you think it's going to be much easier to get that single-family lot zoned to RM13 along with the property that abuts it than if the property starts off?
Not after your comments
RM8?
tonight.
And if the property was zoned RM8, then they have to move up several zoning.
Let me ask a different question then
Okay.
in this regard. Looking at Dr. Emerson's property, or before tonight, had you read the POI corridor study?
Not completely.
Okay. You were familiar with it, though, because you were at P&Z.
I was at P&Z.
Would you agree that looking at the land use map there, Dr. Emerson's property kind of sticks out?
In what capacity?
Well, let's go through the colors on the map.
Okay.
Okay, you got pink, you got red.
So it did, obviously the point you're trying to make is he didn't get it rezoned along with everybody else.
I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to point out that it sticks out.
Yes, I understand he didn't get it rezoned, okay, and that's what this is about.
Okay.
And no one's trying to stop
Thank
the
you.
rezoning.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Just a final question, and this probably it seems to be more than it is, but I assume you're not a traffic engineer.
You're right, I'm not a traffic engineer.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
No problem.
Are there questions of staff of the witness, please? Seeing none, thank you for your comment.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We have another public comment back here. Please come forward, sir.
He does need to be sworn in.
We'll ask him when he gets up. Thank you. Sir, have you, first identify yourself, and secondly, have you been sworn in?
Yes, my name is Art Newberger II. I live at 903 Jasmine Lane, which abuts up to this property.
And were you sworn in?
I don't believe so.
Okay, we'll swear you in. Go ahead.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you. This property, like I said, abuts up to my property right there on Jasmine Lane, 903, which would be 901 Jasmine Lane. Back when it was 2 lots, it got converged some years later into 2 lots. My concern is, of course, is that this property, like Don said, is 3/4 of an acre. So I'm wondering, what does it warrant at RM13? Of course, I've seen different numbers: 9 apartments, 10 apartments, 13 apartments, depending on the size. Also, this is like within 100 yards of the 17th Street intersection of A1A. As it is now, A1A during rush hour is backed up from 17th Street all the way past the 7-Eleven, which was already discussed. And so what's happening in that area is people are coming off of A1A, racing through the neighborhood to get over to the light over on 17th. So we're going to have possibly an apartment complex at the end of Jasmine and Sandpiper that's going to have to exit on either Jasmine or Sandpiper. They can't exit A1A, of course, because of the ordinance there. So my other comment is that I'm kind of concerned about the lot next to me because it's got about a dozen live oaks on it. These trees are huge. With my measurements on a few of them today, they're over 25, 30 inches in diameter. So whatever project's going to end up here, I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to those trees. We're just going to take them out or whatever. But I'm sure I'll see that during the project plan whenever that decides to happen. So that's about all I have. Mr. Rosenthal covered it quite well.
All right, thank you for your comment. If there is any further public comment, we would certainly take it.
Do you want to cross-examine?
Would you like to cross-examine him? No. You're certainly welcome to. Do you have any rebuttal, Mr. Moore, which would be limited to rebuttal?
Somebody else.
You may come forward, yes, sir. But you will need to be sworn in if you haven't been.
My name is Scott Smith. I live at 908 Sandpiper Lane, and I have not been sworn in.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, I start out by saying there were some emails that were sent out, and supposedly you haven't been able to read them. And we sent out some more recent ones. Mrs. Bach knows about it, and again, you don't know all the facts except for what you're hearing. And truthfully, it is an opinion of mine. I'm more concerned about Sandpiper, Jasmine, all these roads going off, especially Sandpiper and Jasmine. What's going to happen, and I do it every day, I go towards South Beach, come to Carl, come back onto the 17 Causeway, because that's the only way to get across, especially during season. Same thing with my wife. What I'm concerned about is the residential home that this gentleman owns. Again, I believe in property rights. Is that the person that decides to develop it might use Sandpiper as an exit, Jasmine as an exit. So here are all these extra traffic numbers that you're talking about that's not on A1A. It's going to go to around my, excuse me, on Sandpiper towards South Beach, on Jasmine towards South Beach, to add more numbers on my road as a residential single-family home. Proud to live there all my life here in River County. Obviously, I don't like speaking, but I'm here because I'm concerned that if we don't stop it now, what's next? What's next? All of a sudden, I have a single-family home, and everybody else around me is multifamily. That's not what I bought. That's not what I want to live in. I understand that the perimeter is multifamily or commercial or whatever it is. I just don't want the impact on my road. And that's all I'm asking. Thank you.
All right. Do you have any further questions, Mr. Moore, of this witness?
Just a few, thanks. Hi, Scott.
Good to see you.
Scott and I used to ride the bus that departed from the little red triangle at the corner of A1A and Causeway.
Long time.
Long time. Mrs. Har was the world's best bus driver, escorting us safely. Yes. In any event, it's nice to see you. Where do you live on the map, Scott?
I live on Sandpiper, which is probably 5 or 6 roads off A1A going towards.
And which one on Sandpiper? How many units in?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe 8.
8 units in from the road.
Okay, 5.
Yeah.
Incorrect.
Is your home one of the homes that abuts the multifamily at the moment?
No.
Okay, so you live on the south side then?
I live in I'll say the middle of Sandpiper's all yellow.
It'd be nice if we had a pointer, right?
Yeah, and on the south side.
Okay.
It's one of the larger lots, which is nice.
And in reviewing the traffic study, did you have a chance to review the traffic study in the materials
I
at a time?
don't believe in traffic studies. And the reason I don't is because it's all about numbers. But it's actually the inconvenience of the individual that sits at an intersection using A1A north, or excuse me, south. A1A, during the season, it's backed all the way, as we know. And that's fine. But the problem will be on Sandpiper and Jasmine, so I'm trying to get on A1A to go north to get on the 17th Street. They're going to figure out like I did. They're going to go back the other way. They're going to cross on Sandpiper towards Carl, towards, and I think they'll do that on Jasmine.
Okay. Do you have a reason to differ with the number of trips estimated in the study?
Again, that's
fair enough.
I live there. I could count some for you in 10 days. Today, how many go down that road now? If you like.
And finally, would you agree, based on the colors on the map, that Dr. Emerson's property sticks out?
It does.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Can
all right.
Rebuttal that?
This is a yes or no question. You answered it. Thank you.
All right. If there are no more, yes, Mr. Digg, have you been sworn in?
No.
All right. Come forward, identify yourself, where you live, and be sworn in.
Ken Digg, 1846 21st Avenue. I have not been sworn in.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I just have a quick question. In the event the council decides to go with this recommendation to the highest zoning, later on down the road, because they were talking about POI tonight, can that be upzoned again to POI since there was a study done many years ago? Does the zoning permit that to go to a higher use to POI? That's a question. Can you do that?
They can apply.
Yeah.
I'll ask Sarah.
I'll let
Gary's behind you.
Yeah,
Mr.
I'm
McGarry
curious
can.
on that POI.
I mean, anybody can make an application that owns it.
Yeah, under the future land use designation, both RM and RH allow POI, but you have to go through a rezoning process to require rezoning. And I'll put it on the record, I think I did at the meeting, the staff did not favor POI zoning when the applicant had brought that in. We felt that multifamily was a much more appropriate use for this location. So.
Yes, Mr. Day, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. McGarry, for answering my question. So if I understood correctly, it could be upzoned to POI in the future if somebody does request that. I find that interesting, and I'll leave you with this thought, because in our neighborhood, and we're not part of this neighborhood, we're faced with POI decisions that were made a number of years ago, and POI is a failed experiment. It's really hurt us in our neighborhood. Thanks.
All right. I believe that, help me, Mr. Comment, but I believe that brings us to number 6, applicant argument summation.
Actually, we have the opportunity to present rebuttal witnesses.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, staff and Mr. Moore will both have a chance to put on a rebuttal arising out of the comments.
You can rebut. What it says is not intended to simply repeat evidence already presented, but you may rebut evidence given.
Thank you. I'd like to call Mr. Brian Good. He's the traffic engineer that did the traffic study, to respond to some of the comments and clarify the scope of what was included in his analysis. Brian.
Brian Good, Kipling Horn and Associates. Good evening.
Mr. Good, were you sworn?
I was.
Thank you.
I was. We were requested to perform a traffic study based upon the proposal to rezone the parcel from its current zoning designation to R13. As such, we looked at the most intense use under that zoning, which would result in 9 units on that piece of property. Based upon the land use classification of townhome condominium, condo unit rather, we looked at 9 units and you generate projected traffic loading from that land use. The traffic loading comes from ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, study of land use and characterizations of those land uses. Based upon the volume of traffic that was calculated, based upon the most intense use, we performed a traffic study that consistent with the city and county land development regulations. There was one of the individuals came up and questioned the definition of area of influence, how it was defined in the report. I'd like to say that was our definition, but that's a definition provided by the city and county, and it's a technical definition. An area of influence is defined by if a roadway segment is operating over a specific capacity, and specifically in this particular case, it's over 80% of its designated level of service, and you assign a specific number of trips, the 8 and 15, which was referenced by the gentleman, then you're required to study the roadway segments and intersections. Under the most intense land use, this particular parcel doesn't even reach the minimum thresholds as identified by the city and county for analysis of the roadway segments and intersections. We still provided analysis, just understanding it would be concern to councils that this project, this application would come before. We studied the roadway segment. The roadway segment, as identified in the staff report, has been identified to have adequate roadway capacity to handle the 4 to 5 trips, depending if you're talking AM peak hour or PM peak hour. We also studied the intersection of A1A and 17th Street. While we studied it, at one time the applicant was looking at a POI as a potential land use, and we studied it under a POI, which is much more intensive than the current R13 land use designation before you this evening. Under the POI, the intersection was still able to meet minimum level of service standards as defined by the city and county. So with this particular application before you this evening, all the roadway segments and intersections directly immediately adjacent to the parcel have been demonstrated to have capacity to support the change of land use, or to support the zoning change.
May I ask you a question?
I'm sorry, Mr. Winger. I have a few questions for Mr. Good first, if you don't mind, just to complete his testimony, if you could.
Yes, go ahead.
Brian, if you could, just a quick question. You're a professional traffic engineer.
Sure.
We've heard some discussion this evening about the parade of horribles that will happen at the A1A and 17th Street intersection if Dr. Emerson's property is rezoned. Can you translate that into layman's terms for us? If the 9 units were to be constructed, is the intersection at A1A and 17th Street going to fail, or would you characterize it differently?
No, it will not fail. It will operate exactly as you see it operating today.
Which is poorly.
Which I don't think anyone who has used that intersection would characterize it any way other than poorly. But it still meets the city and county level of service standards. There has been an improvement, as mentioned, I think staff mentioned, and I even think the council alluded to an intersection improvement that has been proposed previously years ago to expand the capacity of the intersection. While that is completed and sitting ready for implementation, for a number of reasons, it hasn't been elected to be implemented.
So to follow up on that question and to complete the analysis here, although the intersection isn't operating as anybody in the neighborhood, including me, would not want to see it, there is at least proposed relief on the horizon with respect to amendments?
There is a proposed improvement that the city and county have both.
When would that take place?
That is the million-dollar question. I can't say that because it was previously, at one time, it was a funded project on the capital improvement plan, but over the last number of years, due to funding constraints, it's my understanding, it has been removed off the capital improvement plan as a funded project. So it sits as a potential project, but not funded, as I understand it, and staff may be able to shed more light on it than I
Well,
am.
you know, I question your statement that it's adequate by any standard. There have been many occasions when I've had to go south on A1A, I live in Castaway 5, go south on A1A, turn around and come back, and then I go down Sandpiper or Jasmine and I cut through the neighborhoods, just as the gentleman said.
Now you know who the offender is.
Yeah, no, that's true. I am. I agree to that. So I'm having difficulty. The numbers may say what the numbers say, but I think you honestly characterize how the intersection worked as poorly, and I agree with you.
Let me ask you to also translate the load into these kinds of terms, okay? Bearing in mind that there's an existing single-family use, and so the rezoning would only result in incremental use. Can you quantify the incremental use from this rezoning in terms of number of trips per hour?
Yes, the city and county manage concurrency on a peak hour basis and the PM peak hour, and look at it in the AM and PM. And if I'm quoting the numbers correctly, I believe it was 2 additional trips in the AM peak in the busiest hour of the morning, and I believe it was 3 additional trips in the busiest hour of the evening was the additional traffic associated with the rezoning.
So 1 every 30 minutes and then 1 every 20 minutes?
1 addition, yes.
Okay. That's all I have for the witness.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Ms. Graves.
Did you look at the possibility of diversions down Sandpiper or Jasmine? Like that it might increase the traffic going towards Coral, rather as a choice?
It was discussed, but when you are talking in order of magnitude of 1 car and 2 car, that is, as by any standard, is inconsequential to the traffic loading. The analysis took a more conservative route and again looked at the most intense use and routed to A1A, which is the more congested, highly traveled road. And looked at the capacity associated with all the traffic loading to A1A.
Okay, and what were the number of cars you used estimated based on the 9 units? Was it 18 cars, 2 cars per unit, or 9 cars?
It's based upon 9 units, and it's about a half a car per unit is what it comes down to. That's about the rate of traffic generation for condo townhouse units. So 9 units, you're looking at the 4 to 5, depending on AM or PM peak hour.
Is that number of cars per unit or number of trips per
That's
unit?
That's the number for the 9 units. The total, the most intense use, you're looking at about 5 trips, 4 trips, depending on the time of day you're looking at.
Okay.
So honestly, I know traffic is a very emotional topic, and it always is, no matter what project. But in order of 4 to 5 trips, that's inconsequential from an operational standpoint. It won't have an impact on how it operates today.
Okay. But how many cars, how many parking spaces, I guess it would be more for Mr. McGarry about this traffic, how many cars would be allowed to be on the property?
I couldn't answer.
Well, because, I mean, if you have 18 cars that are exiting each day to leave, whether that's 4 or 5 trips, that's still 18 cars if there's 2 cars per unit, correct?
No,
I mean, are we?
It's
That's
not 2
I guess
cars.
I'm not.
It's a half a car per unit. So if you look in the AM peak hour, it's 5 trips. PM peak hour, it's 5 trips. So during 8 to 9, which is typically your AM rush hour, there is anticipated at full occupancy of 9 units, there'll be 5 vehicles either entering or exiting that parcel. In the PM peak hour, which is 5 o'clock over in that neck of the woods, it would be 5 cars total, 3 entering, 2 exiting. You know, the majority in the evening, people are going to be coming and arriving, coming home from work, townhomes, people are coming home. In the morning, it's people leaving, going to work is what the distribution is. So it's not 2 units, it's not 2 cars per unit, it's a half of trip per unit, which equates to about 5 vehicles.
Okay.
Is that confusing enough?
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I don't get the basic math there. Isn't 1 unit is 1 family, and isn't 1 family got 1 car, and doesn't 1 car go twice a day?
It's townhomes. No. The ITE, and actually for this particular land use, I had looked at it briefly. I think they had studied 273 land uses to characterize traffic generation with townhomes, condominiums. Because of the more communal orientation of townhomes and condos, the traffic generation is not as strong as a single family.
Because you go with a neighbor or something?
Usually you'll have 1 mail, just the easiest thing is to say 1 mail truck comes, delivers mail to the whole, all the tenants or residents within the condos, where it's not like single family. A mail postal truck has to visit each home to deliver mail. That's a trip. That's a traffic generation. Yeah. So it just has a different characterization than what you might be thinking from a typical single family.
Yeah, that's what I was comparing it to. 5 singles. Yeah.
Is that?
All right. I believe that would bring us to 6 applicant arguments summation. Is that correct, Mr. Comet?
Yes, sir.
So we will listen to Mr. Moore, your summation.
Summation will be very, very brief in the sense that I'll simply reiterate the larger points. The evidence that's in front of you has built from a standing start to the conclusion that RM13 is the appropriate density for the property. I would also point out in that context, you can look at it one of 2 ways. The applicant, in discussions with the staff, decided not to ask for POI, which was the more intensive potential zoning for the property, and was in fact the use that had been suggested for this property specifically by the POI corridor study, and which exists in the neighborhood. So in one sense, in terms of intensity of use, the applicant is trying to strike a middle ground in asking for the multifamily use. I would point you to Mr. Good's comments on the traffic studies. The counting unit for traffic is trips. It's hard to understand, but that's how they think about it. It's not units of cars, it's how frequently the cars move in and out. I think as best that I can understand, and I think I well understand Mr. Good's comments, the traffic impacts of this are expected to be de minimis. I think all of us have concerns about the intersection of A1A and 17th Street. This project is not going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. More importantly, there are potential improvements planned for that intersection. In fact, the rezoning of that little red sliver took place to facilitate that a couple of years ago. So that is it's on the books. And in fact, the condition of 17th Street and A1A could be improved after this. Most importantly on traffic is this. There is a concurrency review that takes place for traffic uses at the time of permit application. Okay, and at that point in time, the traffic analysis has to establish that it will not adversely affect level of service.
In essence, what you're dealing with on the traffic side tonight is a strategic question. That strategic question shows de minimis impact. The tactical question on exactly what would happen, as is the concern on many of the points about what would be done at the property, takes place in the site plan approval process at such time as the site plan is brought forward. Okay. And I think that would be the place where we would do it. Analyze that. In closing, I'd simply say I think we've built a record here that would allow you comfortably to find that there's substantial evidential matter to support the RM13 zoning that's been requested, and I would ask you to both use the land use map and the zoning change.
Mr. Moore, I asked the City Council, may I ask Mr. Quote from the minutes of the Planning and Zoning and ask him a question that was asked there?
Certainly.
Huh? Is that permissible?
Well, I mean, it is his summation.
I'll do it under council discussion, but he won't have a chance to rebut.
If Mr. Moore doesn't have a problem.
Welcome any questions. That's fine.
Okay.
All right. I'm reading from page 7 of the minutes of May 7th of the Planning and Zoning.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Moore said there are currently no plans for this property. The number of units is tied to the size of the property, which is remarkably small to consider for multifamily development. In terms of rental properties versus condos, they would think the market would support a few townhomes. Mr. Cahoy asked why didn't they apply for RM8 zoning. Mr. Moore explained they're asking for RM13 because it would give them the potential of having 9 units. He noted that having 9 units in the site would be a very tight fit. Their thought was to ask for the largest density possible and work backwards from there. Mr. Croteau, I don't pronounce his name properly, he said RM8 would allow 5 units. He asked, wouldn't there be a more logical number of units that could comfortably fit on this site? Mr. Moore answered, perhaps, but the flip side is the viability of a developer coming in at 6 or 7 units. They have to come back requesting another density increase. I guess my question of you is, why isn't RM8 satisfactory? I mean, this is 7/10 of an acre.
It's 7/10 of an acre. It's oddly shaped. Okay, there is no plan. If there were a plan at this point, it may be well that the applicant could say 5 units is the plan. RM13 comes with a higher degree of flexibility in terms of size of units, floor area coverage, all sorts of different options that enhance the viability of the project.
So you're going for all you can get?
I wouldn't characterize it that way at all. What I'm saying is that the RM13 gives flexibility to the property. The size of the property is what effectively limits it.
Mr. Moore, I believe keeping Vero a great residential community is all important. And I believe personally that steps, and you could debate this with me, you say, well, we'll take this step, but we probably can't put 9 units on it anyway, but if we do, we'll come back with a planning and zoning. I don't accept that logic. To me, you could get 5 units on this. 9 units, I think, to me, it is what you're doing is you're building a path to something that's unacceptable in the area, in my own opinion. It's just my opinion, okay? So, anyway.
I appreciate your opinion. It's hard to refute opinion.
I'm not asking you to. But you do agree, I mean, I read the minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And those were the minutes. And you did, in fact, say they're asking for RM13 because it would give them the potential to have 9 units. So, I mean,
That's among the reasons. That's right. It also gives greater flexibility in terms of size of unit.
Thank you for your patience.
I'm sorry, my answer wasn't complete.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd appreciate the opportunity to. That there are other reasons to ask for the RM13 zoning other than to try to maximize the single number of units.
What are those reasons, please?
I stated them. Greater flexibility in terms of coverage on the lot, greater flexibility in terms of per square foot per living space. It gives anybody who would come in to add multifamily the greatest set of options. And it's ultimately consistent with every analysis that's been done of the density that's appropriate for that property. That's the key.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Much appreciated. City staff argument or summation, if any, Mr. McGarry?
I just
Just want to clarify something, and I probably misspoke. Adult congregate living is allowed in that district as of right. Where the conditional use comes in at 18 is for like St. Francis Manor, where you have kitchen facilities. So really the highest density you can get on this property is 13 units an acre, which would be 9 units an acre under the RM13 for the size of the property. Just want to clarify that.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? It's not a conditional use.
It's only conditional if you do the 18 units an acre.
So, but at 9, it could happen.
That's.
And is that the same for 8 and 10, for RM10 and RM8?
I believe it may be true. Yes. I think one of the things in getting to the issue you brought up about that, to the north you have RM13, to the south you have RM10. To go to RM8 doesn't quite. That was one of the things we brought up when I believe that thing was dropped during the.
Well, but RM8's across the street, so I mean, it's a patchwork.
Across the street is a major highway. It's not quite next door neighbors. Thank you.
Do you have any, Mr. Moore, you can rebut or ask Mr. McGarry any questions? All right, that would conclude the witnesses, the applicants, any public comment. Council discussion of the testimony, other evidence presented, and application of the code requirements and law. I think it's clear that Dr. Emerson has the right to have this property rezoned. I don't think there can be any argument about that. Zoning is it's one of those things that governments do, and you can see the map in front of us. It ends up with results of one sort or another. For myself, I do not believe that this road will take additional traffic, and for myself, I do not believe having the possibility of 9 units is a good idea. For myself, I would accept RM8. I will vote against RM13. That's my summation. Go ahead, Ms. Turner.
And so once again, we are here to review the evidence as presented to us this evening. I think the applicant has gone through all the steps. They paid their fees, their licenses. They presented their case quite thoroughly to the Planning and Zoning Board, as well as that they have presented that this evening. I believe the requested zoning change is consistent with the area, consistent with that development. I believe that we have a duty to give this property owner the right to develop this property. It gives us an opportunity to maximize that income for the city as well as far as tax generation. It's constrained by the size of it. You're not going to have some behemoth structure there. Possibly as a civil engineer, it's a little more easy for me to understand and accept the traffic studies, as well as a member of the MPO and knowing how they level service. Believe me, whether you deny this project or not, you are not resolving any issues on that interchange. That interchange is a whole different thing. You're talking about adding 5 trips to this area. I think that we would be doing a disservice to deny this applicant this application.
Thank you for your summation. Would anyone else like a summation, or are we ready for a motion of one sort or another?
My concern, my only concern is that with having 9 units possible as an adult congregate living facility, you could have 2 people per unit. There's one being developed on my street right now, where they're doubling the occupancy based on the adult congregate living requirements. I do think that he should be allowed to develop this property. As you see, that there was a plan in place, and other people have been given the same abilities, and like Ms. Turner said, everything is filled out correctly, but the RM13, it does make it more attractive to those kinds of facilities going in, which are becoming increasingly popular in our state and in our community. So I wish it had been R8, R10, because then you are looking more at a residential possibility rather than an adult congregate living. But the case is it's a 13, and whether we like it or not, it's been submitted correctly.
Ms. Graves, I'd also like to caution not to confuse the zoning with the use, because once again, they will be required to come forward to all the groups to review the actual use and the site plan itself.
And at the same time, I would remind you that by law, we can't say, oh, well, because it's an adult congregate living or a sober home, we can deny it. That's a problem all these communities are facing. That's why the one in my neighborhood wasn't denied.
Mr. McGarry, I think testimony is closed. I'm sorry, sir.
Well, okay. Yes, sir.
I mean, it's council discussion at this point.
All right.
Mr. McGarry's desires to
Just clarify it, a statement made so you understand, that's all. I'm just saying adult congregate living is allowed as a permitted use under RM8 also, just so you know, as a permitted use. That's all I was trying to do.
Okay.
Right,
so
and I understand that, but if RM8 would pull it down to 5 units, just the decrease in units would decrease the likelihood of adult congregate living.
Adult congregate living, it doesn't go by units where they have, that's what I'm trying to clarify. They go by units when they have their own kitchen facilities and that. Adult congregate living usually has a congregate meal facility and all that. It's a totally different way. We go by rooms. It's a little different. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to the statement was made. I want you to make sure
I appreciate the clarification.
You understand, you want to make sure you do what you said. Okay, I'm sorry.
Mr. Old, do you have an opinion?
I'm uncomfortable with the potential density, and that's kind of where I am.
So where does that leave us? Someone make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, just as an observation, and if you look at this map, I'm looking at the property between Jasmine and Sandpiper, and just given if you go from the east to west, the pattern, I think once you get to the subject's property, I think you could easily see that you could probably fit continuing that pattern, maybe 4 units in there. Given that to the south you have a slightly larger property that's RM10, across the street and south you have 2 RM8s. I would say RM8 is probably the appropriate at this time. I'm comfortable with the big jump. If I would definitely vote for RM8, RM10. It's a possibility, but RM13. I don't know what the potential uses of this property. But it just seems to me that the gentleman that bought the property had a use for residential and not for development. I'm really curious as to why what the future plans is for RM13.
Well, I think we have to. Let me ask you a question of the city attorney. Do we have to accept the application for 13, or can we change it to some other zoning? Or should we ask that they come back again?
You could grant it with of course, the ordinance has written you would have to make in your motion the change in the ordinance to the RM.
Well, could we make a motion to change it to RM10 or RM8? Are we allowed to do that?
You could do that. Now, remember, you do have 2 ordinances. They have to be voted on separately.
Well, I'd make a motion to change it to RM8.
Second.
Well,
however, that isn't what the applicant asked. Can we arbitrarily change it? No, I would think that we would have to reject it completely, or we could amend it. We could ask the applicant if they'd be willing to accept, because I was going to say, I don't think we as a council could arbitrarily change
obviously, the council could amend the ordinance, but the applicant also can appeal that to the circuit court.
Yeah, you need a specific finding to change it, but you can offer to change it.
Based on the evidence that we've seen, what is the specific finding to justify changing that from the application?
Too many units on 0.74 acres. 9 units is not reasonable on 0.74 acres.
Not reasonable to you based on what? Based on how many square footage per unit? Where are you coming up with saying that that's not reasonable?
Well, we'll put it on Indian Bay, ma'am.
Well, I can say reasonable.
Sir,
just by the surrounding neighborhoods.
It doesn't look like across the street.
My suggestion would be, if you look at a property that's identical almost in size, it's RM10. Over here, the biggest one that's RM13 is much bigger. I mean, this is almost identical in size and shape, and it's RM10. So if we want to be,
keep in mind that's a much larger piece of property.
But I'm saying, but it's as far as size goes, with that kind of density, the closest in size is RM10. Right next to it.
Well, I have a motion and a second to make it RM8. Do we want to vote on that, or do you have other guidance as council?
I would make a motion to vote on it as RM10.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion.
Well, I think, Mr.
A point of order, you're going to have to do the future land use before you can do the zoning, or it's inconsistent.
It would still require the residential high on the map, on the form.
Yes, no matter what you do in the zoning, any multifamily would be consistent with that, under that.
So we're dealing only with 4A1, is that correct, is that what you're saying?
To start with, you need to do that to lay the groundwork before the zoning can be changed.
Okay, Ms. Graves?
So for 4A1, it says to residential high, is RM10 residential high, or is that considered residential medium?
It handles all residential densities. You can go to residential high.
So how many units can you put on RM10?
Well, you can only put what the zoning allow. So it does, if you vote for the residential high, that means in the future it could go to higher if depending on what the zoning is, and lower there. The zoning is going to be what establishes the density on the property. But having an RM8, RM10 is not necessarily inconsistent with the RH. All right, that's what I'm telling you. So you.
But based on, I do. I do. But what I'm asking is, based on RM10, you said the number of units would drop to 5. So that would fit within
7.
residential 7.
7 under RM10.
RM8 is 5.
RM8 is 5. That's
so that would fit residential low.
No.
Because it says residential low is 6 units per acre.
That would have to be residential M, or residential medium.
So
RM.
residential low 6 units per acre does not apply here?
No, okay. None of our single family really tough to get 6 units an acre.
Is anyone else reading the title?
That's how it is. That residential low covers all single family. All right. But any multifamily has to go to one of the other classifications.
Well, do I hear a motion? I withdrew mine.
Well, we're doing land use first, correct?
That's correct.
Future land use map, right.
So I make a motion to accept ordinance 4A1 to residential high.
RM13?
I second
that. No,
that.
because the zoning is part of 2. Well, we're just dealing with
no, that's
the land.
The land use, and then the zoning is for 2.
The actual zoning is A2.
Yeah, that's when we talk about 10.
I second the motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mrs. Bach?
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
Yes.
Okay. I mentioned to amend the ordinance to be RM10 multifamily residential.
Well, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The motion should be to approve the ordinance, adopt the ordinance with that modification.
Okay. We adopt the ordinance with the modification that the zoning move from RM13 to RM10?
And I'll second that motion, but I would like to ask the applicant if they would be amenable to that modification.
We'll reserve any comment. I mean, it's workable. It's better than RMA.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mrs.
Sorry, who seconded the motion?
Ms. Turner.
Mrs. Turner seconded.
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
No. All right, thank you. That will move us on to, they say about government that it's something of a cookie cutter process, so.
Then we did it right.
Well, that's all I can say.
If everyone leaves feeling the same way, we did it right.
Yeah. Anyway, that moves us to 3, a resolution of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, amending the City of Vero Beach General Employee Retirement Plan, amending Article 1, definitions, amending Article 2, eligibility and participation, amending Article 5, retirement benefits, amending Article 7, termination of employment, amending Article 8, total and permanent disability, creating a new Article 15, plan freeze and participation in defined contribution plan, providing for conflict and severability, providing for an effective date requested by the City Council, final public hearings, staff comment.
The first ordinance that you have in front of you, which is tagged but the second one, but the first one is where you are freezing the defined benefit plan, and it'll be in place July the 1st. And then the defined contribution will take its place effective July the 1st, which is the second ordinance down. But this is in conformance with the direction the council has been giving for at least the last 3 years.
All right. Public comment on this, please. Mr. Meyer, come forward, sir.
Steve Myers, business agent with Teamsters Local 769. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I guess I want to talk about 4A, 3, and 4. I guess they're kind of intertwined, so if I could talk about them in concert with each other, if you would allow me. There are certain provisions that have already been imposed by this council through the process when we had a quasi-judicial hearing here. And those terms and conditions aren't lining up and conforming with what is being brought forward in your ordinance. So what I would suggest that we do is, or that you do, is that you table the issue or you put it off to a date that's not July 1st, because nothing's going to match up. There's dates, there's percentages, there's amounts that just haven't been negotiated or imposed by this council that aren't going to mesh. So you're going to have a problem. Second point is that July 1st is a couple weeks away. Moving employees from a defined benefit plan into a defined contribution plan takes planning. The employees have to meet with a planner. They have to meet with somebody that knows how to tell them how to invest their money, because they're not investors. They don't do that. The city doesn't even have that set up until sometime in mid-August. So you're going to implement something that's going to happen July 1st, and nobody's going to have their money invested, or they're going to have to make a rush choice of what they're going to invest their money in. So, I would suggest that, and I'm not quite sure, that the language in the ordinance is the same as it was the first meeting, even though there were changes at the first meeting. So I'm not quite sure how that all lines up with what you're doing tonight either. So I would suggest that you table both issues on 4A, 3, and 4. Thank you.
Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah.
Well, we do have some training planned for the employees as to how the 457 and the ICMA will work, and they are bringing in folks for those type of educational purposes. We have had them in at other times talking about ICMA, where they have had a presence in the human resources several times before. So I'm not sure that people didn't have that exposure of what they can do and talking to the ICMA. The only change that I'm aware of in here is where we went from 7 to 9.
So if the plan goes into effect July 1st, but the employees are getting trained in August on their options.
It's not August, is it?
What kind of effect does that have on their enrollment?
And that actually is the next ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Or next resolution.
Talk about both of them.
My understanding is that the ICMA accounts would be set up before August, and that the payroll deductions would be made, the money would be transmitted. One of the reasons we chose ICMA when we did the RFP is that their default investments are not, something like money market, terrible like that. They're actually those age-targeted Vanguard funds. So until employees had the opportunity to go in and meet extensively, one-on-one, they would default to those age-targeted funds for a month or so. Also, the one-on-one meetings would be August, but it's my understanding there would be ICMA representatives having group meetings for employees starting next week.
That's my understanding as well.
It's August when they would have the opportunity to sit one-on-one with an investment advisor and make some specific decisions about their money. But there would be some briefings, in the next couple of weeks. So that's my understanding.
I just personally, there'll be a small amount of money, and they'll, in July and there in August, they'll decide how they're going to allocate it. It doesn't bother me, but maybe it does someone else.
Mayor, if I could.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve.
And obviously, I didn't get my point across clear enough. There's provisions that conflict with what you're doing in your ordinance, which conflict with language that this current council imposed. Those things have to be reconciled before that can happen, or you're going to have a lot of conflicting dates and amounts. And we can do that, but it can't happen before July 1st.
Mr. Comet, is that correct, that we have problems with the ordinance and with the what was agreed with or what was imposed?
Quite honestly, I'm not sure. Jason Odom was the attorney on the collective bargaining.
And that was never reviewed in conjunction with these ordinance?
He drew the ordinances.
Oh,
so
okay.
he's part of that.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? I'll close public comment. Any further council comment? And we are dealing with, at this point, this is the final public hearing for 4.3. A resolution, and in effect what we're doing is a plan freeze, and then we'll deal with the new plan. I would make a motion to accept it as written. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Mrs. Bach?
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mayor Winger?
Yes. All right, now we're dealing with a resolution of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, amending the City of Vero Beach General Employment Retirement Plan, amending Article 1, definitions, amending Article 2, eligibility and participation, amending Article 5, retirement benefits, amending Article 7, termination of employment, amending Article 8, total and permanent disability, creating a new Article 15 plan. Oh, no, I'm reading the wrong one, are you not? Tired. A resolution, I'll start over again, I'm sorry, as you were. 4, a resolution of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, relating to the adoption of a defined contribution retirement plan for general employees, providing for the selection of ICMA Retirement Corporation as plan administrator, adopting the ICMA 401 government money purchase plan and trust, providing for membership in the plan, providing for execution of the trust agreement, and all other necessary documents incidental to the administration of the defined contribution plan, providing for administration of the plan, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date requested by the City Council. This is a final hearing. Staff comment, please.
This is to take the place from the defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. So since you've enacted the freeze, we need to enact some type of pension plan, and this is the option for that. And you're also designating the ICMA as the unit that will carry out that function.
I have a couple questions, just questions. I have the ICMA material and it's voluminous. Why did we select ICMA? I mean, I know there's...
Well, we went through a selection process, and one of the things that we liked about them was, one, that they will come in and train the employees. Number 2, they already had a presence here as part of the payroll. A large percentage of the employees already contribute to an ICMA plan. And the third was that the fees charged were competitive, if not below any of the other.
I mean, are they suitably bonded, and is the money suitably protected?
Yes, sir. They are represented throughout the state of Florida.
Well, that's not what I asked. I mean,
yes, they are bonded and they are protected.
The other thing that I wondered about is, if you are an existing employee, you put in 3% and the city puts in 9%. But if you're a new employee, the city puts in 7% and you put in 5%.
That is correct. That's in conformance with the contract, union contracts.
And in the, I believe Ms. Falk did distribute the updated service agreement and the addendum that indicated the 9 and the 7.
Okay, those answer my questions. Public comment on this. Come forward, Mr. Meyer.
I just want to state my same objections that I stated earlier on 4A3, same objections with 4A4.
Thank you very much for that. Further,
Mr. Mayor,
Council-
just comment on that. He is correct. We did change from what the council had previously said on the 7 and went to the 9%. So I think that's one of the elements that was discussed. But it is to the employee benefit, so hopefully that would not be
I'd be glad to
rejected.
go back to 7.
I wouldn't. Further council comment? Mr. Meyer, further comment? You usually have more to say.
I know, but you put me past my bedtime tonight. I need the rowing team here. You guys, I'm like up the creek without a paddle. It's not just the amount that's in question. There's specific provisions that were imposed by this council related to dates that the employee that was hired on imposed language, for example, an employee that was hired on after October 1st of 2014 will be required to put in 5%. Your ordinance says employees who were hired after July 1st of 2015. So which is it? Which one are we going to go by? We're going to go by October 1, 2014 because we've had employees hired, or are we going by July 1st, 2015? I mean, if I have a choice, I know which one I'm picking, but I don't know which one you're going to ultimately impose on the employee.
Is there any reason we can't have July 1st, 2015?
I don't know of any reason we could not.
Because I agree with you. I mean, somebody we hired should and is on the payroll should get the benefit. You know, what the heck?
So would we need to state that this
In a resolution, I mean, in the...
that this plan?
I'll make a motion that we accept this as written, except for the fact that new employees are ruled as of July 1st, 2015, not any other date.
I second.
Further comment?
I say I have been a strong proponent of going with a defined contribution plan, and however, this plan of going at 9% of a city contribution, I think, is unreasonable. You've got an industry standard of 6%. You're looking. The next 12 years, we're going to be paying $4 million every year just to get our current pension plan the way it is, that unfunded liability paid up. And in addition, now you're going to add a higher contribution from the taxpayers. You're looking at, we're thinking, oh, well, that 2% extra this year is only $136,000. Well, over 20 years, that's over $2 million. I mean, that's half our tax value. I mean, you can't be short-sighted in setting these. I mean, it certainly is easy to raise the number later on, but to start off at 7%, I think I can't agree with that, so I will be voting no.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mayor Winger?
Yes, it passes 3-2. Okay, that brings us to resolutions 5, ordinance and resolutions for first reading by title, future public hearings required. This is the FAA grant, I believe, and it would be, the future hearing would be on July 21st, 2015.
I think we're still on. I think we're still on 4B1. The addition.
4B1, yeah, that's right, because that was
the add-on.
interjected. I tell you what.
You want me to read
Would you
it?
like my 4-1?
No, I'd let you read it.
Okay. A resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Vero Beach, Florida, to accept a grant amendment agreement from the Federal Aviation Administration, U.S. Department of Transportation, to rehabilitate runway 4-22 design and wildlife hazard assessment.
As a comment, what this is an existing grant. We're just adding a scope of work to the wildlife management.
And it does not need a second hearing. It just needs to be open to the public tonight.
Okay, we'll open a public hearing, but I have a question. Our 5% on this, I did read it. How much money is that? Just curious, and it's just curious. I'm not going to object no matter what you tell me.
Eric, do you have that number?
You got me. Airport Director Eric Menger. I did not look that number. Let me just see if that's in the back.
Well, you can inform us later.
It's in the neighborhood of
Has to be done.
$20,000 to the airport.
That's good enough.
Cost.
You don't come back. It's the neighborhood
but
of
I can get it very
$20,000.
accurately.
Okay, do I
motion to approve?
No, well, any public comment? Seeing none. Okay, motion to approve. A second.
Second. Whatever.
Mr. Old seconded it.
Voice vote.
Voice
I
vote.
won.
All in favor?
No,
Aye.
I'm sorry,
Opposed?
it takes a roll call.
Oh, it's your fault this time.
My fault. It's a resolution. It's got to be.
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Weir?
Yes. All right, now are we safely on to ordinances and resolutions for first reading by title to be
We are.
held July 21st? Okay, thank you. I should have caught that, but I'm getting tired. An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, abandoning the portion of Catalina Street bounded on the west by a line established between a point on the north right-of-way of Catalina Street, line 22.2 feet east of the southwest corner of Lot 22, Block 34, and a point on the right side on the south right-of-way line of Catalina Street, line 30 feet east of the northwest corner of Lot 51, Block 22, Royal Park Plat Number 7 is recorded in Plat Book 1, page 36 of the Public Records of Indian River County, Florida, and bounded in the east by the west line of the partial replat of Plat 7 of Royal Park as recorded in Plat Book 14, page 72 of Public Records of Indian River County, Florida, retaining a utility easement, providing for conflict and severability, providing for an effective date, requested by the Public Works Department. Staff comment.
This is for redevelopment of some lots over toward the Vero Beach Country Club, and by abandoning the right-of-way, it allow for that, but we're retaining the utility easements in order to serve the future lots as they're redeveloped. And staff supports the closing of the street.
All right, public comment. Seeing none, we'll close public comment.
Is
Council
this
comment.
for a future public hearing on July 21st?
Second.
That's correct.
Mr. Old?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Weir?
Yes. All right, B, an ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida relating to code enforcement, amending certain sections of and subsections of Article 7, Code Enforcement of Chapter 2, Administration of the Code of the City of Vero Beach to clarify and make more efficient the city's code enforcement process, providing for conflict and severability, providing for transition and for codification, providing for an effective date requested by the city attorney. The second public hearing will be held July 21st. Staff comment, please.
I think we pretty well covered it in the memo. I did want to address the issue about the liens. The city still has its liens. The fact is, the Supreme Court's like E.F. Hutton. When they talk, everyone listens. They've said that you can't make your municipal code enforcement lien superior to anybody's mortgages. You still have priority if liens are filed after a code enforcement lien is filed, except for purchase money mortgages. Those have always been senior in priority. So that answers the one question Mr. Hunter did raise about that. We felt that we were making this amendment anyway to remove the notice of assessment out of the step process that we've been using ever since 2008. It really doesn't serve much purpose other than giving violators an extra month to violate. So we felt there's no legal reason to have it. Basically, it would work like it basically goes from a citation to a board order, skipping the notice of assessment process, and hopefully will get us some compliance quicker. Other things in there. He also did mention, Mr. Hunter mentioned the issue of a code enforcement officer doesn't have to give time to correct to a repeat violator. That was already the law. It just wasn't clear in the ordinance. So we tried to clarify that. But unless you have any questions, we'd ask you to move it to public hearing.
Well, I would say this. If you read the paragraph that he picked out, which is D, which is on page 15, superiority of liens. Each and every lien created pursuant to this article shall be deemed it's hard to read, equal or co-equal with ad valorem taxes and priority and dignity to any other lien, including mortgages, irrespective, and it goes on and on. I mean, what's wrong with that word?
It's unenforceable. The Supreme Court has said so. The city of Palm Bay took it all the way to the Florida Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, Florida statute says what's prior in dignity to as far as liens go. And they
so
said,
then, say again what you said earlier, it's getting late. Why?
E.F. Hutton speaks. And
yes, correct. Why can we file a lien and hope to collect on it?
Well, we do anyway. The Code Enforcement Board orders are certified copies are recorded by operational law that became a lien against the property and anything else the violator owns, except those things that are exempt from because of the Florida Constitution. The big thing being a residence. You can't get a lien on their residence.
Okay, well, you're the lawyer. I'm not.
Well, statutory law, the legislature decide it's basically, I'll tell you what the statute says. It's the order of priority in the order they're recorded in the public records. If we record a lien before somebody else does, we have priority. But let's put it this way. In Chapter 162, it says these liens travel with the property anyway. And 99 times out of 100, we're going to get paid, no matter what happens.
All right, is there public comment in this? Seeing no public comment, it's closed.
Motion to
I have a
approve.
question,
Go ahead, by all means, Ms. Turner.
I'd be glad to see you mention. What do they consider uncorrectable violations?
I'm sorry?
What are considered uncorrectable violations?
Uncorrectable, it's like a one-time thing. A sign, a snipe sign on the side of the road that the officer picks up, throws in the trunk of the car. The violation has just ended. Correctable or easier, those are the ongoing things like the grass needs to be cut.
That I could understand. I was still struggling with what uncorrectable was, just the terminology.
It's just the terminology we've always used.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, sir.
Was there a second?
And I will second. I assume the motion is for public hearing on July 21st, since I interrupted Mr. Carter.
No, Mrs. Bach.
It's getting late.
Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
Yes, okay, Mrs. Bach, you're up.
Okay, I just have one item. We've had a request from Mr. Ken Daig, who presently serves on the Veterans Memorial Island Sanctuary Committee, to resign from that committee, and he would like to be reappointed to the Planning and Zoning Board. That board at this point does have a position open as an alternate 2 position.
Is Mr. Daig's service on the Veterans Commission Board as a full member, or is he an alternate on that?
He's an alternate on that commission also.
Board jumper. Motion to approve.
I'll second. Or you seconded, Ms. Graves. Okay. Is this voice vote or
That's
I'm getting
a voice
tired?
one.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, city managers.
I have a couple of items. One was an add-on, and that's a license agreement for One Royal Palm Point, dock and boardwalk construction for city-owned submerged land. As you know, we do this on a pretty regular basis, and that dock had been approved through the site plan and been reviewed by the P&Z, and so we are recommending that this license agreement be signed.
So you're talking about 7B?
Yes,
Yeah, 7B.
7B.
Yeah, I did. I
Okay,
skipped
just
one
making
ahead,
sure that
because we have
I'm on
someone
the
in the
right.
audience. And
Right, okay.
I know
Would anyone like to comment from the audience on 7B, which is a license for a dock at Royal Palm Point at the hotel being built there?
not the dock, the use of the submerged lands. The docks.
Okay. Use of the submerged land to put a dock on.
Okay, wait. The use of the submerged land, does that mean that they're moving a structure over?
They will build on top of submerged lands like we do docks that you heard about earlier.
Okay.
And the city owns the land, so therefore they have to have a license in order to put the dock.
We're compensated for that, correct?
No, we're not compensated.
We're just being nice guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a rather big dock, but I think they have the right to do it. So there you go.
The document does say it's for constructing and maintaining a dock and boardwalk in conjunction with a licensee use of its property for a hotel and restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah, which did go through the P&Z.
All right, can we have a motion in a second, and then we'll. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No one opposed. Passes 5-0. You got your A now, Jim.
Yes, this is high pressure pumps. The Afton Pumps, the water plant facility. We are recommending to the council that we award this under the provisions that allow for the compatibility of existing facilities. It is a sole source supply, and it's one that we need to have ordered now in order for because it's about a 48-week delivery point, and we need to really get it ordered when we start doing our improvements at the water plant for the RO plant.
How much is it? I've forgotten.
It'll be $287,364 for the pumps, and then there's approximately $4,000 worth of freight. So $291,346.
The only unusual thing about this is it wasn't bid; it's being done because of reliability. But
correct. It is a sole source. The other thing is the cans in which these pumps fit down into were designed around the Afton pumps. We've had very good response from those. And you may have to remove those cans, which would be pretty expensive if you try to put another pump in.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve this.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 5-0. City Attorney matters.
Nothing else from me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I went to the other page too soon.
Not so lucky.
I supplied you with a memo. I did some research into some different options, as we had discussed a couple meetings ago about code enforcement, particularly in representing the city and the code enforcement officers and presenting cases, especially contested cases, in front of the code enforcement board. Actually, what was done at the last meeting through the authority already in the code, the city manager did retain Nick, and I cannot pronounce his last name. He works with Mr. Frost. He's a former prosecutor, and he represented the city in a couple of the short-term rental cases. But that's one of the options. You can do that. Certainly, either way. The problem is due to statutory law, our own code, and also due process constitutional principles. The city attorney can't act as both the advisor to the basically the court, the code enforcement board, and also prosecute or present cases to that board. So the option is I can do one or the other, but then unless you went to a magistrate who is going to be an attorney, the board still has to have some representation. So the option is hire an attorney to to advise the board, and I could certainly prosecute cases that are contested. The reverse is we would continue to advise the board, and the city manager could certainly still retain a prosecutor to handle any of those cases. It's really, I don't know if the city manager has any suggestion or.
My suggestion is that we handle it on a case by case and use an attorney when we need one. Vacation rentals right now is the hot topic, so we know when they're going to come up on the agenda, and we'll be prepared to address those. But 99% of the cases, for those of us who've attended the Code Enforcement Board, really don't need anything. You have the guy that stands up there that, he put in an outlet and didn't have a permit, so we cite him for not having a permit. And it's a lot of mundane, high grass, that kind of stuff. So I personally would hate to see the expenditure of the money on this particular effort, because I think we're making headway on the vacation rentals, and we definitely would want to have Mr. Frost firm, even if it's someone outside of the Fritz case that would bring it forward so he could be following the trend that's taking place in Vero Beach at this particular time. And I'm not sure we would want to pay him to come over here every meeting. It'd be a little higher than the $265, I will assure you.
I'm happy with your recommendation to leave the system like it is, and at the discretion of the city manager to pull in attorneys when he needs it for specific cases.
The current retainer that we have with Mr. Frost, Nick is at $200 an hour. So whatever his time is involved in preparation and presenting those cases.
Yeah, my thinking is if we tried to hire somebody who's going to be here full time, that's the thing I'm trying to
I wouldn't do it either.
Mr. Kramer, any comment?
Well, I like the idea, and the whole magistrate idea I've been kind of thinking about. I don't think I would have a problem with that on appealed cases, but I think on a normal day-to-day meeting, I think what we were doing is not a bad idea.
Well, remember, that's your most expensive option, to have a code board still do the uncontested cases, because they still need to be advised. And either I can do that or I can present cases in front of the magistrate. Can't do both. So you'd end up having to have an attorney to be the magistrate.
My understanding is we do the magistrate for the contested cases, and for
Right.
the uncontested cases, we just use the board. That way, when it got serious, we would have somebody.
Right.
That's a
But
little more
remember, the
professional.
magistrate is just like the board. It's supposed to be neutral and just hear and decide the cases. He's not also the prosecutor. So you'd have to have someone presenting the cases, either a prosecutor, or I could serve in that capacity, but I can't also then advise the board. So you end up needing two attorneys on top of the city attorney.
Board, yeah.
So,
Well, like I say, I'm
in that
happy with
option.
the way it is now. but-
Yes, let's leave it the way it is now and go home.
And the police, the police chief has been given the authority, if he needs an attorney, that he just gives me a call and it happens.
Okay, I think you have your guidance, accepted what you said. I think that's a consensus. Mr. Kramer, you're up next.
I should have put this at the beginning of the meeting, because I'm starting to see that a lot of this stuff is done a lot easier at the beginning of the meeting. But the Hibiscus Children's Center wants to bring some awareness to their Cherish the Children program for abused teens. And it really just came and asked us permission if they could just put their bench on the public property during their season coming up here. And I think it's only it's getting late. I think it's only like three or 4 months. And then every month they just move it to a different location. So really what they're asking for is to put a park bench to raise awareness for the Hibiscus Children's Center.
As long as it's not purple. We had a red wall, and that was painful.
It's no longer red, Mr. Mayor. It looks a
We got
whole lot better.
We all got a lot of phone calls, I think, on that one.
It was amazing. It was quick, too.
I think there's general consensus. That's what Mr. Kramer is proposing is fine. I don't think we need to vote.
No.
Okay.
You're on. All right, that concludes the agenda except for comment. The only comment I have is on the Lagoon thing, or Lagoon Coalition. I did meet with Mayor Adams and Mayor Gilmore. Mayor Gilmore, of course, is the representative, and Mary Adams is the alternate, and I'm if they're both sick, I get to go. And we were accepted unanimously by the group. However, for it to really be active, it has to be approved by each of the 4 counties that are operative. And then we have to do bylaws, which we plan to do in August with Wayne's help. The bylaws will probably be 3 pages long, and it'll be brought back to you. And that's all I have to report.
I guess I'm up. I'll be brief on this. We did the grand opening with the Hampton Inn. I think a lot of us were there. Absolutely fantastic development. Look forward to see some good things coming out of that. I was surprised to see that Flight Safety had I think it completely rented out the whole facility from day one. The MPO board, we had a heck of a lot of discussion on the widening of Highway 1. That was an interesting thing because I think the newspaper kind of reported that incorrectly. We went ahead and instructed the study to go forward and then come back for approval again. But a lot of the businesses that were rather upset with that the widening would take their businesses out found out that their businesses would not be taken out. There's actually going to be some kind of meandering of the center of the highway that would avoid those businesses. Did the Main Street Vero Beach. Had some real good report by some of the realtors there that downtown Main Street Vero Beach is coming back. We're getting good development. We're getting good response from the businesses down there. So it's good to see some good things coming back. Also, the Business Improvement District did meet, and one of the interesting things that came out of that was a lot of the businesses don't have a problem with taking up parking spaces and replacing them with dining facilities and putting tables out there. I was absolutely amazed. I would have figured they were a little more protective of their parking, but I think in the future you may see more of these little bump outs and more dining in downtown. And then finally, we did the flag ceremony at the Elks Club Sunday, something that I didn't really realize they did, but they did an absolutely fantastic job, and they take it extremely serious. And honored the Gold Star moms who had lost loved ones in the conflicts. And that's it.
All right.
I also attended the MPO, and just to elaborate a little bit on Mr. Kramer's comments, that Indian River County was named a bicycle-friendly community. We are one of the few counties to attain a bronze level. Certainly, it means we've got, it's acknowledging our cycling education, the cycling events that we've been holding in the community, as well as our expanded bicycle pass. I mean, certainly the work is not over yet. We certainly want to go to a gold level or then a bronze, but it's great to see that those efforts are being recognized, and we'll continue to keep working on that for bicycle safety. I already talked about that. Attended the Indian River Chamber of Commerce annual luncheon on tourism. And yes, we did have the most incredible tourist season ever in Indian River County this year. Tourism was up 30%. So we weren't just imagining there were more people. It was the most successful tourist season we've had. Had the pleasure of attending the DARE graduation at Rosewood Elementary, and it was wonderful to see so many parents out there supporting the program, stopping and telling me that they remember when their older children had gone through the program and that they were still talking about the education that they received and the important points. And I think that's something for us all to remember as we go into budgeting and how important these community outreach programs are. I want to remind everybody that this weekend, McKee Botanical Gardens was hosting their 11th annual Water Lily celebration. McKee Water Lily Collection is the largest in Florida. I think that's a lot to be proud of, with over nearly 350 individual plants and 100 different varieties. And with that, I will pass it on
to Ms. Graves. Let's get her first.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ms. Graves.
I was out of town for the past few weeks, so I don't have anything to report. I just want to wish everyone a happy Father's Day and remind everyone to go out to the 4th of July celebration for the fireworks at Riverside. I'll be there. It's my favorite day.
Yeah.
So thank you.
When is Father's Day?
Sunday.
Next Saturday.
Is it?
Sunday.
Okay.
Sunday, yeah.
I've been away also.
We'll see if your kids remember.
I was out in the Gulf Stream last Sunday because my son was going to. But anyway, go ahead.
I've been away and back, and if you think we have problems here, I was in the Middle East this last few weeks, and they have a lot more.
All right, I believe
Mr. Mayor, before you adjourn, real quick, I'll just throw in two things. One thing Mr. Kramer brought up about the bump outs and using parking spaces on 14th Avenue. That is a permit that can be given through the city manager's office, and the folks that I have talked to up there, we plan to give that permit for a temporary use of city property. And the Blue Agave is the one that is the first one to come out, although we have already done it for the Kilted Mermaid, so we'd already done one. Another thing on the DARE program that you all brought up, this was our first year with the middle school DARE program, and it seems to be expanding. We now have 2 officers who are certified as DARE teachers, and so we're able to rotate folks through that program.
All right, and actually the 7th and 8th grade, I was at that too, but 7th and 8th grade were done together, which was really kind of interesting. I mean, that's a very charming age, really. Good age for kids. All right, I believe we stand adjourned then.